Our city doesn't need to spend the time and the money or risk the destruction of valuable natural resources to provide something that our mountain bikers can get so close by on either side of Minnetonka.
Producer Jeff Strait hears from Minnetonka residents who oppose plans for a mountain bike trail in Lone Lake Park. This is Democratic Visions.
Just the peace and quiet of being able to come here and almost completely forget that you're even in the middle of a big metro area.
The trail would let bikers rip through protected areas with pristine big woods and an endangered bumblebee, and would betray decades of Minnetonka stewardship.
I think this is the most beautiful park that we have in this area. My first walks are very early in the morning, so I get to see the ecosystem at its best.
Lone Lake Park's 146 scenic acres are nested in southeast Minnetonka. It boasts nearly 2 miles of formal trails, including a loop through a remnant Minnesota big woods and wetlands, and alongside a restored prairie and branch of 9 Mile Creek. As a Minnetonka community park, Lone Lake also sports arguably the most beautiful settings in Minnesota for pickleball, basketball, youth soccer, tennis, and families. Families and friends who merit time off from our ever-crowding high-tech world. Rush hour on Shady Oak Road east of the park is in sharp contrast to the quiet of trails within. But the traffic speaks to the appeal of southeast Minnetonka and adjacent quarters of Eden Prairie and Hopkins for small and large employers, for commercial and service sectors, and new housing. Investments, the coming of Southwest Light Rail, and smart planning are part of the mix. A city consultant projects that the best opportunities for infill and repositioning or redevelopment in Minnetonka are in the Opus and Ridgedale areas. Major projects in Opus have already begun or are in the planning, financing, and approvals pipeline. Its near future promises more residents and more daily visitors. That future also guarantees a more important role for Lone Lake Park.
This park has a field of wildness that you can't find in Minnetonka. It's very difficult to find. You have to really go to. And so that's part of the magic of being in this space.
Now, mountain bike activists have claimed that little will change at Lone Lake if their 4.7-mile course is built. I don't think so. After checking videos of local mountain bike trails on YouTube, it is clear to me that there would be change that would betray the defining character of Lone Lake Park and Minnetonka. I love Lone Lake Park. With me right now is Linda Russell. She lives in Minnetonka and she's a retired school teacher. Also, Larry Wade is here. He's a naturalist. He's written a book about Lone Lake Park. He takes walking tours of that lovely part of Minnetonka. Welcome to Democratic Visions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. What's happening in Minnetonka right now regarding Lone Lake Park?
There's a proposal to build 4.7 miles of mountain bike trails.
There's many of us that are opposing this bike path.
Now, part of Lone Lake Park is that classic big woods that characterized a lot of Minnetonka, parts of Eden Prairie, and all around Lake Minnetonka.
That's correct.
And you guys are taking care of that remnant of the big woods. Talk a little bit more about that.
Well, the forest at Lone Lake has existed for over 700 years.
700
years. That's the age that biologists are telling me that the big woods actually was. And they said that the big woods was so dense that a squirrel could go from one end, which would be where Monticello is, down to Mankato without ever touching the ground.
You know, we're worried about the rainforest in Brazil, but
That's a very good point. We've got right here, we have it happening right here. I've been working with a DNR biologist, and according to him, only 3% of the big woods exist that was once there.
So it is very important, wouldn't you agree, Linda, to not mess with what's left?
It seems to be that the values of Minnetonka as a city are to preserve green spaces and to have a healthy respect for that, and we would encourage the city to preserve this remnant of a big woods and make sure it's protected for our future generations to learn about.
Well, maybe I wrongly assumed that it was protected.
Well, it is true that part of the park is a preserve.
Okay.
And the preserve is to provide passive use and nature study, things like that. The other part of the park is for recreation. There's soccer fields and tennis courts and basketball courts and plenty of opportunities for active use of the park. And you're right, the preserve, you'd think, would be protecting those trees, but this trail project would damage and take out some trees.
And it's going to impact the land. We're talking about erosion, compaction of the soil. Sure, the trees might continue to live, but however, it's going to impact their growth and also the energy of the land there. It's when you walk back there, it's pristine, and that's what fills up the walker, that's out there to enjoy that, enjoy those big trees.
Well, the word passive recreation is used to describe bird watchers, people who just want to hike. It's not passive at all, at least for people like me. There is so much happening out there.
That's a very good point.
If you look and
bird
walk
watchers.
slowly. Yeah. And you just, every time I walk over that branch of 9 Mile Creek underneath those trees, there's something different happening there. It is a theater, the theater of Mother Nature, and it's beautiful. And it comes also not with just the visuals, but with the sound. It's a blessing, and there's not much left. I would imagine most people support your stand regarding protecting this area.
Well, I don't know if they do or not. The council has got a tremendous amount of pressure on them.
One of the things that we don't know is really how does the neighborhood feel about this, because there have been no neighborhood meetings on this proposal. And since it is a park in the southeastern corner of Minnetonka, those of us who live there do consider this to be our neighborhood park.
Yeah.
Yes, many of us have joined together in this friends group, and many of us have communicated with the council members and the mayor, and we've met with them, and we've written letters, and we've been at council meetings. But we don't really have a broad sense of it because there hasn't been yet an opportunity for them to actually hear from the neighbors as a group of neighbors. They are required to have community meetings, and when they abandoned a different park to put the mountain bike trails in and they chose Lone Lake Park, they did not go back to the beginning and have neighborhood meetings. So they bypassed that opportunity to find out how do the neighbors who use the park all the time actually feel about this. We are encouraging the council to go back and do that. We shouldn't be going ahead to vote on August 26th without some more organized input from the people who live nearby the park.
That's a very good point. I want to add something.
Yeah.
And the big woods were cut. Only 3% exists today. Lone Lake was cut in the 1930s for raspberry farming. I've heard a number of people say that, well, it's not really the big woods because it was cut. And so I enlisted the help of DNR biologists, and I asked him to walk out there. And he's a plant ecologist, and his whole job is to analyze the land of spaces and assess what's happening there. And basically what he said was that the land has fully recovered from that clear cut. And the reason it has recovered is because of all the 20 years of restoration that the city has done. It is superior to many other areas in other communities.
You're telling me your city of Minnetonka, has spent 20 some years restoring not only the big woods, but also the prairie along the 9 Mile Creek branch.
Absolutely.
So I fell in love with this park, working in it, working with volunteers, doing invasive species removal. I discovered all these new plants that I hadn't encountered before, and it wasn't until afterward I realized that this was an intact plant community. But I really...
And the voters of Minnetonka have been stewards of this park for a long, long time.
Yeah, and not only this park, but the entire so
park.
many of our community parks
Sure.
have been just done a tremendous job.
Those natural amenities, once they're destroyed, they're gone forever. And I think that maybe the mountain bike people can look elsewhere.
And in fact, there will be 2 new mountain bike courses near Minnetonka. One in Carver Park is planned. It's
Sure.
going to be 10 miles long. Our proposed in Lone Lake Park is only 4.7, which is very close to the minimum acceptable length.
Sure.
And then apparently Edina is planning a 6-mile course in Braemar Park. Our city doesn't need to spend the time and the money or the risk the destruction of valuable natural resources to provide something that our mountain bikers can get so close by on either side of Minnetonka.
I know the city of Wayzata, they had 14 acres that they were going to that was going to come up for development. It's right next to where Lund's is, so it's downtown, and they spent $3 million. They put up a bond, spent $3 million. They bought the land, and now it's a preserve. This land that we're looking at, it's part of our local heritage.
Now, the difference between that Wayzata stand of Big Woods and the one in Lone Lake Park is that Lone Lake Park is not right next to Highway 12.
That's true.
Okay?
Yeah.
It is a noisy woods.
Yeah, it's not that great. But however, they did do it. I mean, that was
Well, they
impressive.
did do it. And that's why they come down to Lone Lake Park for a real quiet walk in the woods, I think.
My thought about this whole thing is that this issue is not really about mountain biking. It's really about who we are as a people and what our vision for the future is and how we treat the land. So those are the things I'm thinking of. And I want my grandkids to come in there and be able to walk in that park and learn the story. It's a sad story about the cutting down of the big woods. Well, we need to know what our history is. And if we start bringing kids there, then they can develop a greater appreciation for the land.
That's a great thought. I remind people that humans evolved next to savannas and marshes, not next to freeways or with earbuds.
Yeah, we need to remember who we are.
The city of Minnetonka is currently considering a guide plan that will go to 2040. However, it has long had a plan and mode of operation for this park.
That's true. In 1999, there was a plan referred to as the Post Plan, which is about the use of open spaces in Minnetonka. And it says in it that there should be land set aside for the preservation of natural resources and for remnant landscapes. And I interpret remnant landscapes to be things like the big woods. There's an old growth nannyberry part of this park that's one of the oldest. And that this plan also provides for passive use opportunities. And by passive use, what the city identified at that time through the park board's plan, it was nature-based trails, overlooks, interpretive programs, things like that.
Okay.
Things that don't require a lot of equipment or special trail construction or anything.
So it's part of Minnetonka's.
It's been part of Minnetonka's value system for a long time, and that is actually the time that it prompted some restoration in the park. That was the beginning of that 2 decades long restoration.
Yeah. I'd like to add something that's not even in this preservation plan, and that is they didn't think about having an endangered species in our community. And I think it was 2016 that Heather Holm, entomologist, who's a published entomologist who happens to live in Minnetonka, discovered this rusty patch bumblebee. And it since has become our Minnesota state bee. It's an endangered species. and its distribution has been reduced 80% of what it once was.
Nationwide?
Nationwide. It is found in the Minneapolis area, and it has specific needs to its habitat that are required. That's another reason that we're fighting to create a preserve.
I'd like to add that most people don't know how this bumblebee lives. And we might think that you wouldn't want to build a trail through the wetland garden because they forage there, but actually they nest underground, and they nest in a new place every year. So to say that a bike trail could be built and just avoid a nest is very uninformed, is based on a lack of understanding of the needs of this bee, that it needs to have an area that would be undisturbed so that it can go in different places, and it would not be just in the field or just near the gardens. The queen bee needs to forage on early spring ephemerals that bloom in the actual woods in the early spring when there are no other plants blooming. Mm-hmm. So it would be very normal for it to be nesting up in the areas where they're looking at bike trails.
Is there a vision? Is there a need for a vision for the future of the park?
I believe so. I believe that this proposal has galvanized this group of people that has become the Friends of Lone Lake Park to rethink what could this park actually be and how could it contribute to the other wonderful amenities that Minnetonka offers its residents. We would like to see this park keep the big woods, maybe put it under the protection of a land trust so that it is considered officially a big woods remnant. Many of us have been volunteering in the park for years. I've pulled my share of buckthorn, and so has my husband, and Larry brings all these kids into the park. We'd really like to continue to work. We're not finished with this park.
The Friends of Lone Lake Park would love to hear from you. You can get in touch with them through Facebook. That's Facebook.
Democratic Visions is handcrafted by volunteers from Eden Prairie, Hopkins, Edina, Minnetonka, and Bloomington. Watch us on select cable systems and on our YouTube channel. This is Carol Sundstrom.